Hey Laowinners, it's Laowinners here with another video, and I'm going to bring up something that I thought was really interesting. Now, every single person in the world knows that stereotypes exist. There's stereotypes about men, stereotypes about women, there's stereotypes about certain regions of your country that you're probably aware of. For example, I'm from the US. There's wild stereotypes about people on the West Coast being very laid back, very chill, maybe a little bit less in your face about things, you know, the whole surfer aspect. And of course, that's just a stereotype. You go down south in Southern America with Georgia and Alabama and all these kind of places, and you'll notice stereotypes as well. People kind of classify Southerners as less educated and more, you know, about the outdoors and going hunting and, you know, Southern barbecue and all that kind of stuff. And you have Texans, which have their whole own thing, but I won't even get into that. Then you have places like the East Coast, where I'm from, you know, New York, Massachusetts, New England, these kind of areas. And we are classified as typically fast-speaking, rude people that, you know, wouldn't be afraid to get in your face about stuff. But these are just very basic regional stereotypes about my country. And actually, they can obviously go into way more depth. But when it comes to a place like China, which is almost exactly the same size as the US, you got to understand that this massive country that probably has, you know, stereotypes that you might think of, kung fu, Chinese food, all this kind of stuff, actually has a lot more specific stereotypes. So you have regional varieties, you have regional delicacies, you have provincial stereotypes. And actually what I've noticed is that Chinese people take these stereotypes much more seriously than your average American. So traveling around China, you can keep your eyes out on a lot of these funny stereotypes, and I hope you guys enjoy them. China is absolutely huge, and after living there for over 10 years, I've noticed that out of all the countries I've ever been to, no one cares about where you're from more than China does. And I'm not just talking about, oh, you're a foreigner, are you from America, are you from Russia, are you from Germany? I'm talking about Chinese people themselves within China, always asking where their hometown is from. This might have something to do with the whole hukou system, which is basically a document that you get at birth that says this is where you're from and this is where you're allowed to work and stay. And you actually have to get that document changed over before you move to another city. Most people don't do this nowadays, but because it's like a super outdated communist system, but that might have something to do with the fact that people really care about where each other are from. And the biggest stereotypical difference actually comes from the north and the south. I'm going to go through those and I'm going to break them down a little bit. Now, northerners, all the people from northern China, there's actually this kind of border, which is the Yangtze River. Anyone north of that is stereotyped as being way taller than average for a Chinese person, way fatter, more jovial, more loud spoken, easier to make friends, big drinkers, just all in all, a little bit more easygoing, loud type people. One of the issues though is that they're often stereotyped as being fighters or thuggish, right? So you'll often see northern people, I shouldn't say often see, but they are often stereotyped as fighting after drinking. You'll see tables overturned, some fist fights in the street, stuff you don't usually see down south. Now the funny thing is, appearance-wise, southern people make fun of northern people for having very small eyes, as they say. And that's the kind of Asian Oriental look that you often see in like movies or stereotyped in cartoons and stuff. That's northern Chinese people, and that's what southerners make fun of them for. Now southern people, on the other hand, southern Chinese people are often stereotyped as being super short, really business oriented and very untrusting. Like all the stereotypes about northern people just quickly making friends over a beer, over some baijiu and stuff. That doesn't happen down south in terms of stereotypes. Very slow to make friends, and very much family first. A real lack of this kind of bro culture that you'd have up north, maybe something similar to, you know, back in the West. The north would be much more similar with the west. The south, it's more like, you are my cousin, so I can trust you. You're my family member, I can trust you. Really slow to make those really long-lasting kind of bro friendships. On the flip side of everything, southerners are stereotyped as being darker skin, which is a negative in China, and also having big eyes, big round eyes, not having that kind of oriental classical look. Now, there's way too many cultural differences just between the north and the south, so I want to break this down a little bit more, and I'm going to pick the first, probably most well-known part of China, and that is Shanghai, or Shanghai, as you guys might call it. Now, Shanghai is a huge, massive metropolis in eastern China, and they have the stereotypes of their own. A lot of Chinese people that I talk to say that Shanghai people have this air of superiority about them. It's almost like their identity as like a Shanghai person or a Shanghaiite or a Shanghai elite is more important or more braggable than just being Chinese. So that's kind of like their first go-to. I'm from Shanghai. And it probably stems from the fact that Shanghai was always kind of this outlier in China. You've had tons of foreign influence. German, French, British. It was always a foreign concession port in the past, so this kind of rubbed off, and Shanghai people are a bit more worldly and they have more expensive tastes and are usually just stereotyped as being incredibly rich. The rest of Eastern China kind of carries some of the runoff of those stereotypes, so Eastern China being like Zhejiang and Jiangsu province. These cities are super famous. Cities within these provinces are super famous for having incredibly intelligent and business savvy people. Very, very wealthy. A lot of startups, kind of when China started to open up, had factories in these areas. And it made a lot of bosses who moved their factories elsewhere. So this area is super famous for being incredibly wealthy, a little bit stuck up, and very, very smart. Next, we're going to move over to central China, particularly in the province of Henan. If you're not familiar with China or the geography of China, Henan and central China, this is the birthplace of Han culture, Han being the majority of Chinese people. If you look at a Chinese person's ID card, 91% of them will say Han Chinese. They come from this area. So why does this area get such a bad rap? These poor dudes and dudettes in Henan get such a bad reputation as being thieves and uneducated and smelly and dirty. If you ask a Chinese person about people from Henan, like no matter where they're from, this thievery, this kind of farmer, this dirty, uneducated stereotype is very strong. A lot of people actually hold this idea, so I kind of feel bad for them. It's also incredibly polluted there, so it kind of gets a really bad rap in terms of like nature and what you can see and enjoy in the area. Overall, central Chinese people get a pretty bad rap, and if you ask anyone about them, prepare for a big spewing of negativity. Now, if we move over to Western China, I'm actually going to highlight two of the biggest provinces in China, and that's Tibet and Xinjiang. These are the big no-nos. You can't even talk about these in China. Even though that they're, technically a part of China, people usually avoid talking about these regions because of how sensitive they are, and there's a reason for that. The stereotypes about these people from Chinese people are that in this Muslim majority region of Xinjiang, they don't even look Chinese. A lot of these people have green eyes. Some of them even have like fair hair, kind of like blondish hair. A lot of them came from Central Asia and moved over. So without any sort of linguistic, historical, or cultural ties, it's difficult for them to consider themselves Chinese. So they often get lumped in together with Tibetan people as being savages and sword-carrying terrorists and religious extremists. And you see a lot of this in the propaganda. If you look at any anti-terrorism poster in China, it's going to have some bearded-looking Xinjiang guy, carrying a bomb or whatever. So they have a really bad reputation as being thieves and violence and just kind of not being appreciative of the Chinese government enough. Because according to Chinese people, these territories are absolutely inalienable places of China. They're just provinces of mainland China, whereas the people there may not think so. If you go a little bit east of that, still in Western China, in Sichuan, these areas have a super big reputation and stereotype for the people only eating spicy foods. So like literally in the morning, they'll eat their liang mian, like their cold noodles, and it's full of chili. Noodles full of chili for lunch. You go to dinner time, Sichuan hot pot, chilies everywhere. I don't know how these people don't have diarrhea all the time. The stereotype for spicy food is super strong there. And for some reason, it's garnered this reputation, especially Sichuan province, for having incredibly hot women. And I think that has to do with the fact that hot and la and spicy, these are all kind of interchangeable, like cheesy words that people use to talk about women. So it might have something to do with that. I've heard some rumors that the water is so pure there and it's so beautiful, and the mountain air is crisp and good for their skin. There is a huge stereotype that the women are massively beautiful in Sichuan province. Cantonese people, southern Chinese people, this area probably has one of the strongest stereotypes. And Winston and I have both lived there for years and years and years. We've been around Cantonese people. We are married to Cantonese women, so we know these stereotypes quite well. The stereotype of Cantonese people is normally that they eat everything. And I'm sick of using this stupid idiom about how they eat everything except for a table and an airplane, all that kind of stuff. What I mean is that they eat the innards of every animal. They seek out very rare animals like bear paws and tiger members and things like this. All kinds of different sea life, all kinds of different traditional Chinese medicine, dog meat, cat meat, you name it. It can be found here. I don't want to stereotype the entire province, but it's hard to refute this because Cantonese people are not necessarily the majority in the province. There's tons of people that work in Guangdong province from outside territories. There's different provinces and all of their influence as well, but the local Cantonese people are very much into their weird foods, that's for sure. And I've witnessed it all. I've eaten it all. And it can be alarming, especially to an outsider. If you manage to find your way into a Cantonese family, you'll see what goes on at the dinner table. It's pretty crazy stuff. But overall, stereotypically, I would say Guangdong is the least Han Chinese province, if that makes any sense. they're typically considered to be outsiders compared to the rest of like northern or central China. Now, Dongbei, I should say northeastern China, the most northern part of China, all the way up near Russia. Very, very snowy up there, very, very cold, and that kind of changes the way that people act. Dongbei people are very, very much machismo, male-driven culture, drinking culture, bro culture, fighting culture. Very loud. You think of a Dongbei person, you think of a blue-collar worker, pot belly, cigarette, and a beer. Just jovial, easygoing people, but very, very much different from the southern counterparts. And Beijing kind of carries this, just like Eastern China carries some of the same traits as Shanghai people. Beijing kind of carries some of the Dongbei characteristics, some of the Dongbei stereotypes, albeit a lot more cosmopolitan, richer, more educated, and love to talk about politics. Obviously, they live in the capital of China. Politics is very much a part of day-to-day life there. So if you go to Beijing, you'll find a lot of taxi drivers and people just chatting about politics. Last region is kind of, I'm going to say, northwestern China, Inner Mongolia, Ningxia, and Gansu. These provinces are very, very different from the rest of China. Not just because a lot of the people that live there are not actually Chinese, like Mongolian or white Muslims. It's the fact that the distances between the places have made a very free-spirited people, a very adventurous type of people. Very different than the hive-minded Han people in the big Chinese cities. So when I was up there, I noticed that the typical Inner Mongolia person or Gansu person or Ningxia person, they were more apt to just get on a bike and go explore or travel. Even if they didn't have a whole lot of money, going long distances and experiencing something new was not that big of a deal to them. Whereas I find the polar opposite down south, especially in Guangdong, where people are scared to leave their own city, you know? So this adventurous bone is very much a part of this region of China, and it's probably one of the reasons that most of my best friends actually came from that part of China. So of course, stereotypes don't paint the entire picture, but this is just giving you a little bit of insight into how vast and crazily different China can actually be. So I hope you guys learned something from that. Thank you so much, Laowinners. I hope you enjoyed me getting jostled and my backpack hit and almost trampled over in the stampede of people. If you did, give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. And don't forget, you can vote on topics, talk to me directly, and actually catch up on my life and the things I don't talk about on camera on patreon.com/Lao86. And also don't forget that every single Wednesday at 1 PM EST, you can watch Lao86. You can click here for another one. And every single Monday at 1 PM EST, you can watch ADVChina. And every single Friday, just in time for a beer, watch SerpentZA at 1 PM EST.